broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to our Pro Cloud question and answer webinar today. I am Lindsay Paoli. I am the Sales and Marketing Director here at Design Manager, and I've been here 12 years now, so I probably know most of the people here in attendance. What we wanted to accomplish with this webinar was really something that was personalized to the people attending, as opposed to the other ones that we do where we break down a topic. So this is the one where we had you submit questions in, and we have a really great list of questions to go off of. So I'm here today with our expert of all experts, Brad Martin. He has 20 plus years of experience here at DM. So like I said, the list of questions that we have right now is really good, but if you want to add any additional questions, feel free to type those into the question pane as we go along. We'll probably only have room for maybe like 2 to 3 more at the end, depending on how long each one will be, but still send them in. We can always answer them, personally later via email or something like that. So feel free to use the time, accordingly here that we've allotted. Yeah, so again, just feel free to put them into the question pane, and I will let Brad take it away now.
Thanks, Lindsay. So as Lindsay said, we have a bunch of great questions here. A lot of good thoughts that people have already asked us, and I think we can cover a lot of really good topics just using those questions and any ones that come in.
All right.
So Lindsay, I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, so our first question of the day here is, someone sent in, when entering payments or receipts, how easily can Design Manager have me correct an entry mistake?
Great question, and very easily. So, as many of you know, cash receipts are going to be under our accounting tab, and they're going to be in the accounts receivable frame and labeled conveniently cash receipts. When we're talking about making any changes or avoiding an entry that we've previously put in, we would actually go to our existing tab, which lists all the transactions associated, in this case, of cash receipts, but the same is applicable to your vendor invoices or client invoices, etc. Now, the cash receipt existing tab is broken into 2 panes or grids. The top grid represents the receipt itself. So we can see that we received a check number 6124 from the Hilsons for $52,000 and change. That actually, though, applies or is distributed to a variety of different entities. There's 3 different deposits on proposals, and there's a payment on an invoice. So from our existing tab, I have a lot of opportunities to make adjustments or corrections. On our payment distribution grid, if I select one of the various distributions, I can highlight it and simply click void. That would remove that specific distribution within that larger cash receipt. If I wanted to remove the entire cash receipt, including all distributions, we would click the void all, and notice that the grid, that the message is a bit different, where it says, do you wish to void the entire receipt, all transactions in the lower grid. So I can easily remove any transactions from cash receipts that I've previously entered. Further, Design Manager still keeps a meticulous audit trail of all of those transactions. I may not be able to see the cash receipt on my cash receipts existing tab any longer, but I could go to my transaction search window. I could go to a transaction register or a variety of other reports that actually show me that I entered a receipt and voided it as well. So there's always a classic and a meticulous audit log behind the scenes. If I wanted to make an edit, very simple. Let's imagine that the Kaplans didn't give us a check for $25,000, unfortunately. Rather, they gave us a check for $2,500. All I have to do, click the edit button, change my amount, click OK, and just like that, we can see that I've easily edited the cash receipt. So cash receipts actually are one of the most flexible transactions in Design Manager. Very easy to make any changes upon, very easy to avoid if necessary as well. So to answer the question, editing or making any changes to payments or other cash receipts is a piece of cake.
All right, thank you, Brad. So the next question that we're going to work off of is, what is the easiest way to refund a deposit on a single item on a proposal?
Ah, great. We had a bunch of various refund questions out there. As is, we all know, refunds, returns, cancellations, those types of transactions occur quite frequently in the interior design industry. So this is a great example. Let's jump over to our project tab and we'll go to our proposals. Let's check out one of the Hilson's projects. Now let's imagine that we have proposal 2 here for the dining room, and one of those items were canceled, as we're discussing in the question. I can see that the proposal itself is 10,169 and change. I asked for or requested and received 5,084.70 approximately, or exactly half of that. If the client then wants to return one of those pieces, piece of cake, I have a few options here. First, I could literally edit the proposal, remove, let's say, the dining room chair, whatever this is here, table, re-accept the proposal, and that $5,084.70 would be reallocated to the remaining 3 items on that proposal. In fact, it will be proportionally distributed to each of the items based upon their requested deposit amount. So if the client said, hey, I'm going to skip that end table there, but just use the deposit for the other items, piece of cake. Edit the proposal, remove the item, and simply re-accept the proposal. The funds remain the same. There's no difference in what the client provided us. We're just allocating it differently to each of the items. Now, that may or may not commonly be the case. If the client says, hey, I'd much rather you take the money that I allocated specifically for that item, don't apply it to the other items, and I want to maintain it on my account or maintain it as a retainer for future use. In those such cases, we've created a very comprehensive window to handle all of those types of transactions called our client returns and credits window. That, as you imagine, would be under our accounting tab. And again, focusing on our accounts receivable frame, we can see our returns and credits. Now, don't worry. Under accounts payable, there's a returns and credits for the vendor as well, which actually tend to be a little bit easier. But the client returns and credits, we really crafted to make such transactions as easy as possible. So we really just need to put our information in. Let's focus again on the Hilsons. Refund type, as I always say, the hardest part of this entire experience is determining precisely what the client expects of the refund. They may want to have it a check written back. They may want to put it on their credit card. They may want to have it on account, in other words, an open accounts receivable. Or let's say in our case, we want to increase the client's retainer. We must know that from the client in order to successfully process the return. So we'll say increase client's retainer. Now I see every item in that project that has some funds applied against it. We can see the deposits we've received for all of them. We would see any payments on invoices or those types of things as well, which really indicate how much potential refund we have. Now, I like to keep my grids nice and tidy, so I might even narrow this down to focus just on the proposal in question. And here we have our end table. If I want to refund this, very easy. I could just select or tag it. Design Manager is going to start calculating the total refund for me in the bottom right-hand corner. In the bottom left, I'm going to process this transaction. It's going to default to today's date, the current fiscal month. Transaction description defaults to credit memo, just to have something for you, but you could, of course, change that. Return end table, etc. Now, commonly, there may be some dispute or some differences in what we're actually going to return. We may not return that entire 1545. If you ever have that scenario arise, just click the edit button. It's indicated by the pencil icon, and you can then change the amount you're going to refund. Perhaps we're only going to give back 1,500. By clicking OK, Design Manager notes that we're overriding the amount to refund conveniently for us. And of course, the total refund will update in the bottom right corner as well. Click OK and let Design Manager do all the hard accounting for us. We're going to be warned that we're going to process it, and in the current fiscal month that we've selected, click OK, and Design Manager is going to do a myriad of accounting for us. When upon completion, in this case, it's going to say, hey, I've processed the refund. Would you like to see the entry that was made that represents it? Sure, why not? And then Design Manager is going to go and actually show us how it's removing the 1,500 from the original item itself, and it's now processing that as a retainer as well. So rather than doing all of those transactions yourself, just sit down, know exactly what the client expects from you, and use the client returns and credits window to do that. Very common scenario, very, very handy window. And in our Help Center, knowledge.designmanager.com, there's tons of articles, tutorials, webinars where I explore that concept a lot more. But as I said, lots of those questions came in today, so we thought this would be a good one. Ready for the next one, Linz?
Awesome. Okay. So we did a refund on a deposit for a proposal. So one of the questions that we got after that was, how do I prevent changes to my books after year end?
Another fantastic question. Okay. As standard best practices, once the accountant and their team has filed your federal income taxes, we want to maintain the integrity of all of that information. In other words, we don't want to do anything in Design Manager intentionally or unintentionally that's going to affect prior year's records. Because then if I go and try to print a balance sheet, an income statement, a transaction, a trial balance, what have you, the numbers are no longer going to match what they were that we sent off to the accountant and subsequently off to the IRS and other tax agencies. Not a good scenario. So how do we prevent this? Go to your file selection in the top left and go to your company information and settings window. This is where we sort of encapsulate a lot of the higher end and more sensitive functionality in Design Manager. As you can see, lots of information here, but we're going to focus on our fiscal month tab. And in the top left, we see entries for last closed fiscal month. And you can see I've already set the 3 areas of accounting to be closed as of the 2018 fiscal year. My year tends to fall on a calendar year. And you can actually even close each of those areas independently. So I may be done doing my taxes for all of my client-based transactions, cash receipts, invoicing, etc., would be under accounts receivable. Anything involving accounts payable, that's the bills from the vendors, checks, reconciliations, those types of things would be under the accounts payable, a closed fiscal month. And finally, the least commonly used general ledger really only pertains to journal entries and some of those accounting functions. So for my business, I'm fine with just closing out the prior fiscal year once all of my taxes are done. Some firms are so on top of things or so meticulous that they actually may close particular months. So as soon as all the entry is done for, let's say, October or fiscal 10, 2019, they would go ahead and actually close that month. That way, each month is being protected. So at any time, so no transactions can be entered or voided or changed if they have a fiscal month equal to or before the last closed fiscal month. For example, if I have, let's go to bills and invoices, existing, I have, great, Federal Express operating expense that's posted into last fiscal year. So if I came in and said, oh, that was a duplicate, I need to get rid of it, I go to click void. Design Manager says, are you sure you wish to? Yeah, why not? Thinking. And then a warning message arrives, not an error, it's a warning message saying entries cannot be posted that affect a closed fiscal month. It's automatically doing a checks and balances against my closed fiscal month settings, preventing me from inadvertently changing any transactions prior to or including fiscal 12 of 18 last year. So your last closed fiscal months really give you control of maintaining the integrity of all of your accounting transactions for a prior fiscal year or even a prior fiscal month. Now, that kind of goes hand in hand with another concept that's worth mentioning. Under our chart of accounts, as time goes on, you may have accounts that are no longer applicable, particularly with banking institutions. You may switch banks or those types of things. And I have an example of that right here where I may have had a checking account with Wells Fargo and I've indicated that as old or do not use or whatever I want to change the account name for, but that doesn't prevent me from inadvertently using that old account when all of my transactions should be going through my Bank of America checking account. You can also close an account. Notice there's a close as of column on our chart of accounts, a glossary. So if I edit our old Wells Fargo checking, I can say I want this closed as of, let's say I opened my Bank of America back in May. I want this closed as of May 2019. Click OK. We can now see my closed as of updates. And that actually is almost the reverse of our closed fiscal months. This will allow us to enter activity up to and including May of 2019, but nothing past that. So if I went to go and enter a check or enter a cash receipt into fiscal 6 or June of 2019, I'd be blocked upon doing so. So you do have a lot of internal ways of managing and setting the availability of all of your fiscal periods on the closed fiscal month options on your fiscal month tab of the company information window, and you can close particular accounts as well in the account glossary. Okay, that's a great question, and as we're getting towards the end of 2019, it's a very applicable one as well. What do we have next, Lindsay?
Brad, actually, we have a new one here that says when a transaction is voided, does it affect only the original fiscal period or does it show the void in the current fiscal period?
Excellent follow-up question. And that actually goes into another example that I could use as well. So we couldn't void our, let me back that up. It depends on the transaction, and here's what I mean. Some transactions, when we void them, give us the availability of selecting when we want to void a particular transaction. Two of them, well, one of them would be our checks. Now I actually have to open up my old Wells Fargo account. And as an example, when we go to void a check, let's pick one here. Here's one for Philip Jeffries. If I go to void a check, I absolutely can control when that check will be voided in the fiscal period. Fantastic. The other option, the other transaction that I can control is invoices. If I'm crediting an invoice from our client invoices existing tab, I also can determine the fiscal month of which the credit memo will be recorded. Transactions that don't have those options include cash receipts. If I go ahead and just void this receipt, it's just going to ask me, hey, are you sure you wish to void? And it does so in the original fiscal month, okay, provided that we haven't closed that month as we already saw. The other transaction that we don't have the ability to control would be, as we saw on our vendor invoices window, we can't control when we're going to be voided here as well. So if those entries, let's say, actually, our Federal Express example is perfect here. We have our prior year closed as of 12/18 as we saw. So as our last example, I can't actually void this transaction. But if it's a duplicate or something along those lines, how am I going to get my books properly reconciled? Easy. What we have to do in that case is manually back out that transaction into the current fiscal year. So in this case, I would actually make, let's call it an offsetting transaction into fiscal one or the current fiscal month, whatever I so choose. So if I needed to get my account balance with Federal Express correct, but I can't violate the integrity of my prior year's records because I've already filed income tax, etc., what I would do is just go, in my case, I'd go right to January, and I'd create the exact opposite transaction. Reverse duplicate. Oops, I put that into 1-1. Remember, when we're entering in dates in Design Manager, just a month space day is all you need if you want it in the current year. Now, if I wanted to put it into 18, I'd have to put the 1-8 in there as well, but we don't need slashes, dashes, or anything like that. Just date, month, day, and you're ready to go. I'll use the same transaction description as my fake invoice number. And that was originally, it was 76.25. So I want to reverse that with a negative 76.25. Put that on my American Express, just like the original bill. And I'm good to go. So this allows us to do two things, both of equal importance. I'm maintaining the integrity of my prior year's financials, very important. But I need to get my American Express and my bills with Federal Express corrected as well. So I'm just actually forcing the transaction to be reversed into the first fiscal month that I have access towards. So to answer that question, to summate all of that, some transactions, checks, client invoices, allow you to select the fiscal month of the reversal. In the case of the check, the voiding of the check. In the case of the invoice, the credit memo itself. Cash receipts, any type of vendor invoice, deposit, operating expense, and journal entries as well, all get voided into the original fiscal month. That's a fantastic question, and again, very timely as we're approaching the end of the calendar 2019.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Brad.
Sure.
The next one that we have here is basically we had a few questions about the chart of accounts and, maybe just explaining, how they work in Design Manager.
Sure. Okay, great questions. Some heavy hitters out there. Chart of accounts. We touched upon it already, but definitely worth a deeper dive. So our accounts are listed under our accounting tab, of course. Now we're in our general ledger frame, and there's our account window. So Design Manager uses very traditional GAAP accounting. So we're going to have all the classic accounts for your income statement and your balance sheet. So in classic accounting terminology, all of the balance sheet accounts are first. So we'd start off with all of our assets, and these are the accounts that represent areas of value in your company. So those would be things like checking accounts, money market accounts, any type of banking institution. Accounts receivable, those are unpaid invoices that your clients are going to somewhat remit payment for, hopefully. Vendor deposits, money we send out to our vendors that's be used on future vendor invoices as an asset. Obviously, inventory and its cousin work in process will be assets as well. Areas of value in the company. We contrast that with our 20,000 accounts, which are our liabilities. These are the sources that withdraw value from our company. Accounts payable, those are all of our unpaid bills. Obviously, any credit card balances would be a liability. Sales tax that we've collected from our client that we haven't yet remitted to the various tax authorities, obviously going to be a liability as well. And a lot of your withholding accounts, of course, and client deposits, somewhat counterintuitively, that's a liability as well. The clients have given us money, we haven't used it for any good or service yet, so technically those funds are still theirs until we ultimately apply them to an invoice. So client deposits are liabilities. The last and most conceptually difficult of the balance sheet accounts are our 30,000 accounts, which are our equity accounts. Think of these as the accumulated capital employed of the company. Basically, it represents the overall net worth. So there's usually very few accounts in here, things like common stock, and its reverse would be owner's draw or owner's distributions. These are areas where funds have come in to the company from the owner or outside sources, and funds have been taken out from the owner. A suspense account really is a transitional account or a swap account when we're making transactions between our income statement and our balance sheet accounts. Retained earnings, that's the sum of all of our net income for prior years. So the equity accounts represent the true overall value of the company. And then we contrast those with all of our income statement accounts. They're going to be the other side and the remaining three areas. So traditionally, they begin with revenue or sales accounts, and they're often beginning with a 4 or 40,000, and you can see all the areas of revenue in your company. Some companies have 1 or 2 revenue accounts. Merchandise, freight, good enough for us. Others break it down into many different revenue accounts. It all depends on the amount of analytics you want to have provided when you go to review all of your financials. Revenue is then contrasted with what we call cost of goods sold. Those generally are in the 50,000 range, and this is the cost of the good or service from our vendor. And the difference between the revenue and the cost of goods sold is going to be the income. Finally, from that, we have our last set, which is our expense accounts. These are generally the company expenditures, things like salaries for employees, rent, office supplies, you name it. They all also reduce the overall net income for the company. So the revenue, cost of goods sold, and expense accounts, they're all on our income statement. And our assets, liabilities, and equity are on our balance sheet. So that really describes the chart of accounts in Design Manager. And remember, Design Manager, again, as GAP has always said for interior designers, utilizes the accrual method of accounting, whereby cash is not really the driving operator, nor should it be in this industry. It's the concept of the invoice in Design Manager, where the vendor sends us an invoice to represent the transfer of ownership to us, and we then give our invoices to the client to represent that transfer of ownership as well. Okay, so chart of accounts. So what's the next question for us, Linz?
We actually just had one come in about maybe setting up some categories on the income statement. I don't know if you want to show that now or at the end, maybe.
No, I could do that as a transition there.
Okay.
So categorizing, I'm going to interpret that as creating groups or totals on the income statement. Sure, no problem. To do so, we can go to our General Ledger tab, on our Accounting tab. I'm going to click the Financial Statements button, which jumps us right to our reporting window with our General Ledger Financial Statements folder. And here we can see our balance sheet, which we talked about briefly, our cash flow statement, and all of our various income statements. Let's take a look at our monthly income statement. And from our income statement window, notice we have a layout option in the top right corner. Here, I can come up with up to 3 different layouts or different views of our income statement. And I actually have a couple of examples, precisely what the user was asking about in categorizing our various accounts on our income statement. So let's take a look here. Great. So looking at our income statement layout, under operating expenses, which is the classic way where we want to subtotal particular accounts, I've created groups by using the new group button. I made one for insurance, and I literally just dragged the account into my insurance folder. And you can see I've got my medical, life, workers' comp, and generic insurance, all within my insurance folder. I did the same for my office expenses. I put the rent in there, gas, electric, office supplies, etc. So from here, I can have each of the groups be subtotaled, or I can have them not be displayed and to show the individual accounts, just have the particular account folder itself, and all of my other accounts are being listed individually. So you can have up to 3 different layouts for both the income statement and the balance sheet, whereby you have the ability to make groups, drag your accounts right in there, and have them displayed in various ways on the income statement itself. I've even created one where I call the summary, where I made single groups for all of my various accounts. So I just have one line under revenue for all of my sales accounts, one line under cost of goods sold for all of my COGS accounts and expense accounts as well. So if I want to just see, boom, where are my totals, I can do that as well. So you have a lot of freedom in all of your various layouts, and you can even name them as such. When you come into your design manager, it'll say layout 1, layout 2, layout 3, and you can just rename them as desired, as I have done. So great question, again, very timely as we're approaching the end of the year here. And you have the ability to, you have a lot of flexibility in how you want your income statement to appear. Great question there, Lindsay.
All right, cool. We are moving through our topics here. We had quite a few questions just surrounding general accounting, but really when we asked for a little bit more detail, we got some questions surrounding the trail of money through DM. So the flow of, say a typical project and what accounts it hits and things like that.
Sure. Okay, great question. I've had that one before. And it's a fantastic way to demonstrate quickly how some of the concepts we just touched upon, how various transactions in Design Manager affect those income statement accounts or affect those balance sheet accounts. So I believe I probably have an example set up in here. Yep, there's my follow the money item. So I've created a fictional item that I like to use to sort of do just what we're talking about here, where I'm going to go and make several of the most traditional and common accounting transactions as this item progresses through the design process. And we can see, I'll show at each step, how various accounts are being affected. Now, to keep this topic flowing along here, I've already skipped a few steps where I've already made a proposal, as I'm sure many of you know how to do already, and I've made the purchase order as well. Why? Well, 1, to keep us on point here and moving briskly along, but 2, neither of those documents have any fiscal bearing whatsoever. They're simply potential agreements between the client, in the case of the proposal, and the vendor, in the case of the purchase order. You can make them all day, they don't affect your accounting at all. Activity that gets affected against them certainly does have accounting activity. So let's take a look here. So imagine that we have our item, and I have my follow the money item. I've already made the proposal. So I presented it to the client. Of course, they're going to love my design concepts, and they're going to remit a deposit for me. So we can see that on our proposal window. Whoops. There's my follow the money proposal that I've already created. Including tax, it's $159, and I'm requesting half of that. So let's imagine that the client goes ahead and sends us their Visa number or what have you, and we go ahead and process that transaction. That's going to occur in our cash receipts, of course. We're going to add a new one. I'm sure this is old hat for many of us. Put in our project. There's our proposal, for our follow the money proposal. Let's imagine that they say, hey, just put $80 on there, no problem. So rather than the $79.50 that they asked for, they're giving us a little bit more, that's fine. So I always put in the actual amount, not what I anticipated it to be. Today's date is just fine. What did I say? A Visa transaction, okay. Visa, put in some final 4 digits there. Now, if I go ahead and select my proposal, Design Manager is indicating that I have 79.50, but my amount is actually 80, so I have a difference of 50 cents. And as many of you know, I'm going to be prevented here. I'm not getting an error. I'm being told that my cash receipt does not match all of my various areas that it's going to be distributed against. Why? Well, I need to change this payment default value, which in the case of a proposal will always default to the requested amount less any received to date. I just need to make that $80. I don't need any decimals in this case. I will change my transaction description, slight overpayment, and I'm good to go. So now my total deposit matches my amount, total receipt perfectly, difference of 0, good to go. And I'll go ahead and post. Now I have accounting. The proposal itself, no accounting. That $80 of deposit, absolutely. Let's go over to our transaction search window. And I'm going to put in exactly $80 into my transaction amount because I know that's the only one out there where I have exactly our deposit. So notice on this window, this shows us all of our fiscal activity. Not to dig too hard into the accounting sides of things, but it's going to tell me exactly what's happening. Every transaction in accounting has at least 2 parts. We're going to debit some accounts, and we're going to credit some accounts, and they must be in balance. In other words, the debit values must equal the credit values. This is a simple example. In this case, I'm debiting or increasing my Bank of America checking account. My Visa goes right in there. And I'm also crediting or increasing my client deposit account. It sounds counterintuitive, but I can affect or increase the value of 2 different accounts with the same exact transaction. So I'm balancing it out. I'm increasing my Bank of America asset account, and I'm balancing that with an increase in my client deposit liability account. Common transaction. Okay, so now we have some of our funds. Next thing we would do is probably make our purchase orders, which I've already gone ahead and done. Back on our project tab, purchase orders, Hilson. Let's sort it. Oops. Yes, there it is. So there is my purchase order for our following of the money. And of course, my markup is 50%, so the amount of my purchase order is $100. Like I said previously, purchase order itself, 0 accounting with it, but it can have a multitude of transactions. Now, in this case, I may send a deposit. That would be another transaction, but let's imagine that I'm going to pay this in full, the whole $100. To do so, we go back to accounting, bills and invoices. Now we're focusing on our new tab, and I'm going to add. On our vendor invoice window, I'm going to select the type, and you can see we have deposit on project purchase order, or in our case, invoice on project purchase order. Put our project and purchase order number in. Invoice number, we'll just make something up. I'm using my transaction, date search by just clicking the Alt-S on my keyboard to select today's date. Paid in full. And let's imagine that I'm going to write a check for this. So I leave my pay with set for check. If I needed to make any changes to freight or those types of things, I can use the edit button to do so. Let me go ahead and put some freight in there as well. Click OK, and I'm going to post. So now I'm recording a vendor invoice against my purchase order. Definitely transactions that transaction is going to be affecting some accounting. Let's see what happened there. Oops. I'm going to put in my purchase order number and project so we can narrow that right down to our Hilson PO. A few accounts were affected here. We have our work in process asset account being increased by $120. The 100 is for the merchandise, the 20 is for the freight. So I'm increasing that work in process asset account. Think of work in process as this. That is like inventory that's already allocated or earmarked for a project. So right now, I own that piece. My company has now taken in possession of that piece, that good or service. So it's an asset to the company. Since I haven't yet remitted payment, I've also increased my accounts payable liability account. It's a liability because I still owe it. So I can be recording bills all day long. If I'm not paying them, my liabilities are increasing and the health of my company, of course, is decreasing. Let's clear up that liability. I don't like those hanging out there. So then we move along. I put the bill in. The vendor's certainly going to be expecting payment. So I can go to my payments and checks window on my accounts payable frame. Here is my purchase order. I can go ahead and print a check. There we go. Obviously, I'd probably print this out physically. Once it all looks good, I would accept that. Processing a check, certainly another transaction worth reviewing. Back to our transaction search. I'm going to focus just on disbursements. Going to use our project again. Keep this nice and narrow. Now we can see what's happening when I pay that check. When I process that check. Now I'm debiting or reducing my accounts payable liability. Put the bill in, I owe that $120. Process the check, send it off to the vendor. My liability with that vendor is now relieved. But I also credit or reduce my checking account. Fantastic. So finally, now we have our dealings with the vendor have concluded. I'm going to then take that merchandise or service over to the client. Upon it being accepted, the client loving it, I would then make an invoice for the client as well. Go to our accounting client invoices, add an invoice, put in our project. Here's our follow the money item. And we can go ahead and generate our invoice. I'll leave these other two invoices on hold, and we can just focus on our follow the money item. And there we go. Looking good. So we can see our merchandise. There's our $20 of freight, our sales tax. I can see my deposit being, I can just look at this invoice and in my head imagine where those accounts are going to be going. I'm going to be reducing my client deposit account. I'm going to be increasing my sales tax. I'm going to be increasing my revenue, etc. Because a lot of that magic, the accounting magic, happens on that client invoice. So let's take a look there. That was invoice 10,041. So I'll look at just invoices. Notice how reliant I am on my transaction search window. I use it quite frequently when I'm researching all of my information. So see here, the client invoice, a multitude of accounts affected with just that one transaction. We'll quickly go through here. First, we're increasing our accounts receivable asset account. Now I've given the client a bill. They owe us that money. That debt of the client is actually an asset to our company. Debiting or reducing my client deposit liability. I've taken the funds that they've provided me and applied it against their invoice. So I'm alleviating any of the money that I'm holding for that client. I'm accruing all of my revenue. So I'm crediting or increasing my furniture and freight revenue accounts. I'm also accruing sales tax. I'm crediting my sales tax liability. At some point, my tax authorities are going to expect me to pay that $10.20 for sure. So that's being increased in my liability of sales tax until I do so. I'm also simultaneously removing my work in process asset account. I'm taking the $120 out of that asset or reducing that asset and quote unquote moving it to cost of goods sold. So now I'm increasing my furniture and freight cost of goods sold account. So the invoice in Design Manager and any accrual accounting is absolutely critical. You can see all of the activity that's encapsulated in that single transaction. So invoicing accurately and timely is of absolute critical importance in Design Manager. And finally, the only other transaction would be the client actually paying us the remaining balance on that invoice. So we can see it existing on our existing client invoices tab. They still owe us $100.20. Let's say they go cut us a check for that. We go back to accounting and back to our cash receipts. Add. I can even put that invoice number in directly. Design Manager then positions it for me very conveniently. And let's say they just gave us a nice check for that amount. And done. And finally, we can see in that case, now I'm reducing my accounts receivable balance. That asset is being removed and it's being redistributed to, in this case, my undeposited funds count as I prepare to actually go to the bank with my deposit. So I'm changing the allocation of my asset from a receivable into cash or future cash with undeposited funds. So each of those little steps through Design Manager, absolutely critical to maintaining good accounting standing, and they all affect one another. All of those accounts that we were discussing, client deposits, and then work in process, and then vendor invoicing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, they're all tied into that balance sheet. So if our balance sheet is in very good standing, we know that our overall fiscal health of the company is in good standing as well. So I know that was a bit long-winded, but that really shows us how that money moves on each step and how each of those steps is very critical in the overall accounting model in Design Manager. So with that long discussion there, Lindsay, I'll get ready for the next question.
Yeah, that was great, Brad, showing every little detail throughout the whole entire process here. Okay, so we have a question here that I've actually received a bunch throughout, all the time. Wanting to get an everything report or a report that you can give to your client that really shows, anything that you're worried about missing as a designer, just something that would be nice to see where it has, the status for a client.
Yep, got it. Yeah, very, very common question. When I hear something along those lines, two reports come to mind immediately for me. So let's jump over to our project tab. We'll go to our project reports. The first is going to be the client status itself. Always remember, when you find reports that are of use to you, they resonate with you, don't lose them. Select them on your report window and hit your add to favorites button. It'll pop it right on your favorites tree. So out of the hundreds of reports that we have, you may only focus on a few score or 5, 10 or what have you. Stick them on your favorite tree so you don't lose them. But in our case, the client status report satisfies many of those caveats in that one, it's client facing. There's nothing in this report that is going to indicate to the client what your cost was or your markup or those types of things. But it will show how each particular item in a project is progressing through the design cycle, both as far as being ordered, delivered to the client, etc. and fiscally, hey, has a deposit been received? If an invoice has been paid in full? So I use this both internally to monitor my project and to provide something for the client. So we'll stick with our Hilson project here, and we'll take a peek. Now you can see we have many ranges in here. You have to select a client, but then you can narrow the focus of the report by putting in a particular project range. The Hilsons have multiple projects. I'm just focusing on one of them. You can narrow it down by location, proposal, an invoice number range. And then you have various selections of the types of items you want to see. Do you want to see all of them? Do you want to see not completed, completed items? You have an option for your pricing calculation. Do you want to see your estimate? Do you want to see the actual invoice price? Do you want to have a sort of smart pricing where it's going to show the estimate if there is no invoicing, etc.? So you can really have a variety of accurate ways to view the pricing of the items, showing details, which I generally do since I'm using this as a status. Then I have a few formats, detail by location. That's going to show the entire project, each of the items being grouped and subtotal in their location, but you could do it by the subtotaling of proposal and then locations within that proposal. That resonates quite nicely with the client because they think of all of their documentation on a proposal basis. So if there are multiple proposals, they like to see this format in that it aligns exactly with the documents that they've approved and signed. And you could even do a summary in that format as well, which would have the proposal number, one page per proposal, and then just total all of the information by location for a little less detail and a more succinct document. I can then even narrow down what items I want to see. Do I want to focus on items with deposit, items that are invoice, items that satisfy either one of those conditions? So right away, you can see how much flexibility and power you have in this document. I do like to show my color-coded status, and then I can even use my item status codes to narrow it down as well. Let's take a peek. Okay, so quickly, what do we see here? Quite a bit. Again, I am running it for a particular project, and I am subtotaling by location. So I have certain items that don't have a location, and then I have dining room, kitchen, etc. I see the reference number, I see the quantity and unit measure, the description. I can immediately see the proposal date and number. I can see the pricing, tax, whether or not a deposit has been received. If so, the check information associated with it. This is the one we just put in, our follow the money. We can see the balance, if it's been invoiced. If it's been invoiced and paid, what check number has been associated with that particular payment, and the estimated amount due. So you have all of your client forward information right there. Proposal information, deposit information, has it been invoiced? What's the total balance due on it? Then I have my status, of course, my color-coded status, and I have optional order tracking dates. So I can see or present to the client, hey, when was it ordered? What is the expected shipping date? Has it been received by our company yet? And those dates may or may not be applicable to your business model or dates that you consider worthy of presenting to the client. Well, you can control that as well. Under our file, company information again, as we said originally, this has a lot of our sensitive information, and even deeper, we're going to go to advanced and right on our print tab, client status dates. Just like I said, I've selected order date, ship date, and receive date, but you could have any of the dates listed here or none at all. You may want to see the delivery date. You may want to see your custom install or lead time dates. These are custom dates that I've created, etc. So whatever dates are important to you and your client, you can have it customized for that. So I can track my order tracking information. Has it been ordered? Do I have an expected ship date? Has it been received? Just from this information as well. So I have all of my client information easily presentable to them, and in a snapshot between my 3 order dates that I've selected and my particular statuses, I know precisely what's going on with this particular project. So I love this report. And of course, it subtotals at the end on a per project basis as well. But I may want a little more information. So as a internal document that may or may not be suitable for providing to the client, under our order tracking folder, we have our project order status. Let's jump that into our favorites as well. This report will now also be showing all of our vendor forward information, cost, payments to the vendor, who's the vendor, those types of things. So this is definitely more of an internal document. Again, I can narrow it down by client, project, location, or proposal. I can use my item status codes to narrow it down further. I can exclude completed items, which definitely makes sense as the default on this report. I'm using this to track the progression of items through the design cycle, but I could also use it as a financial analytic as well. So in that case, I may want to include completed items. In progress items only represents items that are on a proposal and a purchase order and not invoiced yet to the client. Again, checking items sort of in the throes of that transactions. And additional info, this is just how much detail do I want to have listed on the document, and we'll talk about the project summary in a second. And here, you really have a snapshot of all of the information possible about this particular project in one quick glance. So we can, again, we're grouping by location and subtotaling and sorting by location. We can see the item information, proposal, cost, price, deposit requested, what's been invoiced, payments, what have I paid the vendor? What do I owe the vendor? What's my current cash statement on this particular item? Well, I owe the vendor $1,028.50, but I've received no funds yet. So as I was saying, you can think of this report not just to track all of the order or how the item is progressing in the design process physically, but also financially. How much profit am I making? How much cash have I taken in from it? And if you look a little bit deeper, then we can see all of our component information for each of the components on the item. And we even have snapshots of custom crafted status where we tell you, wait, what was the proposal date? What was received, the deposit received? What was the date, etc. Design Manager actually crafts all that information and displays it for you, predicated on all those transactions in Design Manager. And again, you subtotal by each location. I also like, as I said, to run this periodically using the project summary. Now I'm not using it so much to track the item through its progression in the design cycle, but rather as a financial tool. So instead of showing each of those components and items and all that tracking information, I'm focusing solely on the financial information where I can see all of my pricing, all of my profit, etc. for each of my projects. I just ran it for our Hilson Pocono home, but you can see if I run it for all of my projects, I can see all of my pricing, all of my costs, what's been invoiced, payments, what's been paid to the vendor, what's my net cash flow on this particular project, etc. So you want a snapshot of funds coming in, funds coming out, and profitability? Here you go. A great way to do so. So those two reports to me dynamically and immediately give me that sort of all-encompassing idea of showing everything for a project or against all projects on a single document. Great question, Lindsay. That does come up a lot, so I'm glad someone asked that.
All right. How about doing the question, how to create a list for shipping or receiving?
Excellent question. Another good one.
Okay.
So when I get that question, I often think of a function in Design Manager that is somewhat surprisingly underutilized and unknown to many of our users. That's called the delivery ticket. So under our project tab, under our documents, you're familiar with your proposals, familiar with the purchase orders, we have project delivery tickets. I can use these documents as shipping manifest, as receiving manifest. Heck, I can print them out myself when I want to walk through a house to make sure that all of the particular merchandise has been delivered properly. Let's take a look. Very similar to making a proposal or what have you, we're going to put in our project. Since I don't have any delivery tickets currently, I'm going to add. And now I'm focusing on all the items within my project. I have the date in the top left corner, defaults to today's date, just like our proposal and purchase order. There's no fiscal bearing here. We're creating a shipping or receiving listing. But if I want this, if I know shipment's going to occur on a particular date, I could change it. Whether or not to include pictures, very handy. If the individual is unfamiliar with the goods, that could certainly help. Does make the document a bit longer. What is the address? Am I going right to the site address, which is the default, or perhaps this is going to a receiving company? So I could change the shipping location to any of my current ship tos. We'll just say it's right to the site. And then we can see we have the option within Design Manager to show or not show the component information. Sometimes we may want to keep that a bit hidden from either the client or the receiver, but there may be times when an item has multiple pieces or components that we want to ensure get delivered as well. So we'll select a few of those to show the difference. The reference number, the picture, of course, the description. Then we have our various quantity and values. First is the quantity itself. This is the item quantity right from our specification window. The quantity delivered, this would be any items that we've already delivered in the case of a partial shipment. And the concept of being shipped is my delivery ticket indicates that the merchandise went out, ideally from the shipping location, my building or whatever. The quantity shipped represents what actually got there. Heaven forbid we have 4 chairs, one falls off the truck, it's smashed on the highway or whatever. We want to be able to track that as well. So let's do a ticket for, I don't know, how about all of our dining room and kitchen items, and we'll take a look. Oops. Let's do this. I'll use my tag button here. I'll tag by location, and I said dining room. Okay, and we'll tag our kitchen too. Since I don't want to do all of that manually, perfect, and we'll have a couple examples with our components on there. Excellent. And here we go, delivery ticket. So we can see we have each of the, all the items are going to be grouped by location, which makes sense. The shipping location, that's either the site address in our case, or the designated shipping code. Each of the items, in this case, I did show the components. For these 2 items, the chairs and the table, but for the others, I did not. So notice there is a bit difference there. We do have more information, such as the vendor, the purchase order number, the storage location catalog number. Some firms want that, some don't, and you can optionally select it. Then we have the quantity ordered. Now think of this from the client's perspective. That is what they ordered from us. So this is the item quantity itself. What's going to be delivered? And the shipping quantity is simply a blank. Ideally, that can get recorded by the individual either walking the home or receiving all the goods or shipping all the goods. And in fact, even at the end of the document, we can even have someone of the appropriate responsibility at the home sign and date it to ensure that everyone's agreeing on what actually got there. Fantastic document, multitude of uses, like I just said. I can use it when I'm walking through the home to check everything off as I'm going from location to location. I can give this to my shipping team. I can give this to an expediter. Really handy document Very nice, modern, professional appearance to it if I want to give it to the client. And it gives us another degree of tracking information. So if we look at those items in that project, here's our table. On our status tab, we're even tracking it was on a delivery ticket, how much was delivered. We're not bothering with the shipping quantities right now, but that deliver date is another one of our client status dates that we could use, as we saw on that report. So the client can see, hey, oh, it was delivered, etc. I use that document all the time. It gives me the power to select items individually. I can select them for the entire project. I can select them on a per location basis. It has a great professional feel to it, and it's something that people often end up printing in Excel or outside of Design Manager. Why do that? Let the information that's already in the program be of greatest assistance to you. So I'm glad that question came up. It's a good one.
Okay, so we are overtime already, but I do have three good questions, Brad, still left, and I think they're relatively short. So if you wouldn't mind hanging with me here,
Fire away.
can you just quickly show, we had a question come in about making vendor codes or client codes, changing them. And the system, you cannot change them, you have to make them inactive. So would you mind just showing those screens and
Yeah,
how you do that real fast?
definitely very important, great concept. So under our list and glossaries, or under the address book, whichever you prefer, you can go to the address book in our case. If I wanted to make one of my vendors inactive, very simple. Okay, simply edit the vendor, and you have an inactive option on the right-hand side. What this will do is prevent that and vendor from being used on the specifications window, on your accounting, all of those types of things. It drops off all of your lists so you can't search for it, etc. However, that vendor is still there. I could reactivate it. I still have all of the accounting associated with it, of course, and those types of things. So just like on vendors, clients are the same way. You can edit a client and also make them inactive. Doesn't go away. Client could come back. Very nice way of keeping a lot of housekeeping, keeping your list tidy, accurate, etc. Great question.
Okay, and the last two, just how to export a client list or any report, to Excel, just very basically. And then the last one would be to show a client statement.
Sure, great, okay. We'll tackle the first one, the exporting. You have several options here. One, I'm going to use the client invoices as an example. Nearly any grid in Design Manager, now this is black belt techniques. You can right click on that grid and select export and send that grid right in to Excel. It's going to make it into an XLSX file, and you're good to go. I'm not going to do that to tie up the system, but that's a piece of cake. You can do that from almost any grid in the software. Very easy way to get your list exported. For reports, piece of cake as well. We'll go to our accounts receivable reports. Let's pull up, how about our aged accounts receivable? Tying this back to some of our discussions before, this is a listing of all the invoices I have for my clients that are yet not paid in full. And I have the option here to export to Excel as well. I want to click the export or email button in the top left corner. It has like an envelope with a little arrow on top. I would then select export and click OK. The default is always going to be Adobe Acrobat, Adobe PDF, but you have a variety of different formats from which to choose from. You can go right into Excel as well, and you're good to go. So two methods almost, and then finally, certain windows even have a listed export function, such as our transaction search window, which we're quite acquainted with today, I even have an export button explicitly listed on that window as well. And a few others will have the exact same. So 3 ways. Right-click those grids and select export. Any report whatsoever can be printed to the print preview and then select the email export button, and you can go right into Excel if desired. And finally, certain windows like the transaction search explicitly have an export button on them. Excellent question that ties right in to the final question on the client statement. Since we saw that I have a bunch of invoices that are yet unpaid, I may want to have some sort of document to indicate to the client that it is time to, in fact, pay up. To do so, I go to my accounting tab, my AR reports, statements, another one that I may want to add to my favorites, and I can print my statement. I can do it for a single client, I can do it for a single project or a range thereof. If the client has multiple projects, I have the option of including all of the projects on a single statement, which would be the no selection on 1 per project. I could show paid items if I desired, where I'm using the statement in a less traditional manner, but more of a accounting history as well as unpaid balances. I can show the transaction description of the invoices, and I can even optionally show the items on those invoices. We'll do both of these as an example. And here we go. Now we're going to obviously have a single page or pages for each project. We can show the invoice on each of them, the current balance due. Any payments would show, of course. If I have a transaction description on the invoice itself, it would appear right here. And I can even optionally show the items. Certain design firms or the client may say, I don't remember what's on that invoice. I don't believe it. Well, you can then have the little item sub description in there as well. So here's one with a little bit more information. I've changed the, I've updated my invoice description here. I'm showing my items. I have payments being listed, etc. So there is our statement. And again, you don't have to show the items. I wanted to demonstrate all of the variety ways that the statement can be used to indicate what the client owes us and what was included on those invoices as well. So very common, very classic document. Statements should be sent out each time that you're reviewing that accounts receivable report to ensure that your clients are paying you on a timely basis. Excellent question.
Okay, Brad, we have one more. All right, this is it. If you could just highlight under the file tab up there, the import area where you're going to be able to import. So in Design Manager, if you want to import clients, vendors, and inventory items, this is where you're going to go to do that.
Yep. So it's got to be in an appropriate file type. Generally just get it into Excel or something along those lines. Tell Design Manager what you are importing, so you can't do clients and vendors on the same file. They would need to be separated. And then Design Manager will ask where the file is. And after that, you're going to be asked to, let's call it, associate the information in your sheet into Design Manager's information on each of those various entities. So if you have a file of clients, you'll say, hey, client name is column A, client address is column B, etc. So a very handy way to do so, particularly for clients and vendors, and for all of those of you who are new users to Design Manager that have a stock inventory that you want to get into the system, we can do that here as well. So don't feel like you're on an island and have to do all that work yourself. Using the import function is a real piece of cake and very, very intuitive to do so.
All right, so that is the end of our discussion here, but I think it went really well. There's lots of attentive users out there, so we appreciate your patience with us as we work through a lot of those interesting concepts today.
I agree, Lindsay. Very good questions. Thank everyone for presenting those. We went all over the board, accounting, project management, using reports, inventory, all of those types of things. Really well-versed set of questions. And I thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope to do this again in the near future.
Yes, absolutely. Please go sign up for more of our webinars out on our live webinars page. You can get there from the footer of our website. You could really literally just Google it, Design Manager webinars. It'll come right up. So we have one about every other week. The holidays coming up, might be a little bit more sparse, but we have a great lineup coming up of project management courses, I think is what we're starting with in the new year as well. So please go sign up for more. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.